Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode on overview of disclosures under BRSR. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for taking the time and joining us today. I'm Simoni Rathod from Ludha & Company ESG Practice. Ludha & Company is one of the oldest assurance and advisory firm with 6 different offices all over the country. Today is the first episode of the webinar series on ESG reporting by Indian corporates. In this series, we will understand the entire life cycle of business responsibility and sustainability reporting. The purpose of the webinar is purely for educational purposes. Any kind of compliance decision shall be referred to a professional advisor. Attendees are requested to stay on mute at all times during the session. In case of any questions, clarifications, attendees can post them in the question answer box, and we will be happy to address them at the end of the session. Attendees can also write to us at esg@lodaco.com. We will also provide the recorded version of the webinar upon request, and the same shall be available soon on our YouTube channel. From the financial year 2022-2023 onwards, as we all are aware that SEBI has mandated top 1,000 listed entities to report on their responsible business practices via the new BRSR framework. The BRSR is nothing but the replacement of the existing BRR framework. The BRSR report is required to be prepared using the new format provided by SEBI, along with the guidance note that enables the entity to interpret the scope of disclosures. The BRSR seeks disclosures from the listed entity on their performance against the 9 principles of National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct. It is essentially reporting of non-financial risks that an entity faces in the long run and the entity's resilience towards such risk. Entities should note that BRSR reporting is secondary. Focus should be on developing educate policies, procedures, and good governance practices to ensure a positive BRSR report. A negative BRSR report, though it is not a non-compliance from the regulatory perspective, but it will create a negative impact in the minds of the stakeholders. Now, I will pass on the virtual floor to Mr. Manishankar Prasad to provide us insights on what is ESG, how ESG is integrated with BRSR, and give us an overview on the disclosures under BRSR. Mr. Manishankar Prasad has 14 years of environmental and social consulting experience across 10 countries. He leads the ESG practice of Ludha & Company at the moment.
Absolutely. Many thanks for the kind introduction, Simoni. And thank you all for your precious time this Friday late afternoon and morning, evening, afternoon from wherever you're joining this session across the world. It's our pleasure and an honor to be speaking to you and explaining what is ESG and what is BRSR. So I'll start with what is essentially ESG and what is the relationship with reporting and disclosures overall. ESG is environmental, social, and governance. We are all aware of the triple bottom line perspective, which is people, planet, and profit. The financial disclosures concentrate on the profit aspect, which is on the financial side of the story. But what about people? What about the planet? We hear about sustainability and equality and equity and diversity all the time in our medias. Whenever we open the pink papers or whenever we read through the business channels, we only listen about sustainability and ESG nowadays. What is it all about? It's about balancing financial and non-financial considerations on the same plate. Like, for example, disclosure is not new. Disclosure has been a part of capitalism ever since the Industrial Revolution. Bookkeeping, accounting has been a part of the trading international finance ecosystem for centuries, if not for years. So why are we doing this non-financial reporting? Why are we considering environmental and social risk? We are considering environmental and social risk because it is a business reality of the day. It is a part of the evolving social compact and contract which organizations and businesses have with their stakeholders and shareholders, right? We need to move beyond what Milton Friedman said, that the only business of business is to speak to or it is to engage with the shareholders, and shareholders in terms of financial shareholders. But as Alex Eadman of London Business School mentions, that shareholder capitalism is not enough. We need to talk about shareholder capitalism, and we are talking about the G whenever So why are we talking about the G whenever we are talking about the E and S? G is about creating the right framework, the right atmosphere for transparency and trust, so that whatever you disclose regarding carbon or regarding community, that there is consensus. There's a third C over here, that is consensus about carbon and community whenever we talk with regard to the financial, which is the cost, which is the fourth C we are talking about. So we are talking about an entire range and spectrum of actors over here. Essentially, ESG is something which is derived from the investment community itself in 2004. It was done by the IFC, it was done by the Swiss administration, which needed to integrate environmental and social risk in terms of financial projectized decision making as well. We must remember the GRI has been around for 20 years, since 2002. The IFC performance standards and its previous iterations have been around for 20 years as well. So we are not talking something which is very new. Next slide, please, Emily. So as we talked about the aspect about ESG being a subset of sustainability, right? But it is a subset of sustainability which talks about risk, how to integrate risk in terms of decision-making mitigation in the climate capitalism era. ESG is nothing but the quantification of risk factors through ratings, through rating agencies, through indicators, and indicators are the technology of global governance in day-to-day operations which people are trying to make. And why is ESG so important for the global financial community or the global enterprise community over here? It's important because ESG is unlocking access to capital. ESG is unlocking access to markets. It is unlocking access to talent. So the paradigm is shifted. Once the social contract changes, reporting also changes, and we are including ESG as a part of disclosure. There was a very interesting statement by Grace Tsai, who is the CEO of Unrivaled Carbon, in a podcast which I heard recently, saying that as we have the financial cost of a product listed on Amazon or on any other retailing website, in the future we'll have the carbon footprint of a product also mentioned with the cost. So we are reaching towards a stage where non-financial disclosure is no longer exotic or esoteric, but it is mainstream. So of course, ESG is only a trifecta. It's an acronym which enables an entire alphabet soup like TCFD, GRI, SASB, and TNFD, and many others. But it is essentially about how do we integrate these factors into decision making, and where is the role of reporting over here? Reporting is a term which is borrowed from the financial accounting lexicon, which is very mainstream, right? So where does ESG reporting come from, and how does BRSR fit into this ESG mold? BRSR is nothing but business responsibility and sustainability reporting. So it's our Make in India, it's our Atmanirbhar version of ESG reporting according to an Indian context. It is a bottom-up perspective on ESG reporting, which is an exemplary measure by regulators like SEBI and other stakeholders in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. It's incredible. But this localization of ESG standards is not an outlier. We are not doing anything tremendously different from maybe what the EU is doing regarding EU taxonomy, or whether it is the Monetary Authority of Singapore having its own disclosure standards. Practically every publicly listed exchange in the world has its own disclosure standard, including every central bank. So we are pretty much following the global climate zeitgeist on reporting itself, but we have created a framework which is our own, which is great and also benchmarked with GRI and SASB and also TCFD. So we are both benchmarked, but we have created our own narrative, which is very encouraging. Next slide. So as I mentioned, ESG has not come out of a vacuum. In fact, no phenomena rises out of a vacuum. In 2009, there was something called the National Voluntary Guidelines, which moved the needle towards responsible governance in the Indian business ecosystem. And about 10 years back, there was the business responsibility report for about top 100 companies which were listed, which was essentially baby steps towards sustainability reporting. Then of course, another major milestone node which we have not mapped over here is the company law of 2013, right? Which mandated a 2% cess on for CSR funds for companies beyond a certain financial threshold. Then in 2015, the BRR was extended for the top 500 companies. Then we slowly moved along the maturity curve to integrated reporting. In 2019, something stellar called as the National Guidelines for Responsible Business Conduct, or NGRBC, came into existence. Why is NGRBC important? Because a lot of the disclosure frameworks within the RSR are completely benchmarked to NGRBC. So Section C, as you will see later on in the presentation, is based on 9 principles of NGRBC. So about 2 years back, a few companies started doing voluntary BRSR. And of course, companies had to do the BRR as a part of financial reporting itself. So this 100 odd companies, according to NSE, who have done the voluntary BRSR, most of them have also done the sustainability reports, the integrated reports. So those companies are pretty much pioneers and first mover advantage people who have done exemplary work in terms of reporting the non-financial information and risk to the wider world to see, almost like a transparency mechanism, which is excellent. Kudos to them. Next slide. So ESG is basically required, as I mentioned, for value creation, for access to markets, because a lot of vendor requirements for companies mandate ESG, for example, as a part of supply chains. If you want to export to the EU now, according to the latest green taxonomy in the EU, you need to benchmark your carbon emissions scope 1, scope 2, as well as scope 3. And it also creates opportunities for innovation, right? Whenever something novel and new comes up from a regulatory perspective, it's also a catalyst for innovation. It is also a site for disruption. And this disruption brings about a lot of value creation across various points of the value chain. And value chain is an important term from the perspective of BRSR, because the term value chain itself is a very loaded, it's a very layered concept as well, which is being used in the BRSR reporting process. So these are some of the keywords like value chain, like materiality, these reporting boundaries, for example. These are some terms which are really very critical to the understanding of how disclosure works. Next slide. So we start the conversation or the dialogue on BRSR at the moment. Remember that this is the first of a 5-part series. We're really talking about the governance, we were talking about plans, procedures, implementation, reporting, and challenges, the entire spectrum or the entire value chain of it, to add a pun over here, of the BRSR journey. So in this presentation today, it's an important start to a conversation that we believe in. And hence we are starting with the structure of the format of the report itself. How do we start? How do we broach the subject? How we how to think about BRSR in terms of an implementation perspective. If you're a CS of a company, if you're a compliance officer of a company, how do you start thinking about gathering the data or understanding what are the anchors behind BRSR? How is it important for you? How is it material for you in terms of your business continuity and operations? So the BRSR is divided into three major categories of disclosures. Section 1 is the general disclosure, which talks about the organization itself. Section 2 is more about management and process, which talks about governance. The G, the heart of the G in Section B. And Section C is a mix of both E and S, a very heavy emphasis on human rights, but also like Principle C of Section C is all about environment. It's all about your water footprint, carbon footprint. Have you done an LCA? Everything environment is also included over here. So it's pretty broad set of indicators, and it is done from a regulatory perspective. Of course, from this year onwards, it is a mandatory compliance measure for 1,000 top publicly listed companies. So, so this is something very, very important for organizations to consider. So among the Section C indicators, let me add, there are the compulsory indicators, essential indicators, which you have to report, but there are also voluntary indicators, which are, of course, leadership indicators at the moment, which means you're going more than what you ought to do, but it is a fast-moving target. It's an evolving goalpost, and what is leadership today might be status quo tomorrow. And this is something we should think of as well. Next slide, please. So I start off with the Section A general disclosures over here. So the disclosure is connected to an objective. Why is the disclosure important? And in connection to the objective, where is the data found from in your operations? How do you create an evidence trail, or how do you report your information? Because compliance is about evidence at the end of the day. Although assurance is not mandated, a few companies who have done voluntary disclosure or BRSR have done their assurance as well. So there are the details of the entity. There is the reporting boundary over here, which is a very crucial concept to understand as far as reporting is concerned. What is the reporting boundary of your organization as far as BRSR is concerned? And this is a ready reference for investors. This reporting data is found in the MCA 21 portal, where you fill up these information for other parts of your compliance disclosures. So second element is what percentage of your workers or employees have a turnover. Why is it important? A turnover is a very important metric to understand what is the organizational health of an organization, of a company, because it is also a metric for if your organization is employee friendly. Do you in a backhanded way take care of your employees well? So the metric for this is the ratio between male and female employees, and also permanent and temporary employees as well. So that's a proxy indicator, but that's a very valuable insight into the human side of the story, right? This human reporting angle of your organization. Number 3 is, of course, it's a general disclosure, but I think so it's more from a perspective of governance as well as S, because grievance redressal, whistleblower policy, complaints from dissatisfied workers and employees is a very important metric of how you're running the organization. So the metric for this can be the number of complaints received. Where do you have an ombudsman in place? How have you resolved your complaints in the current and previous financial years? These provide a snapshot of how do you are you a fair organization, are you an ethical organization as far as the companies are concerned. And grievance redressal mechanism often also means that you have mechanisms in place to ensure that your companies have a safe space at work. So so the number 4 over here as a part of Section A is that has the company done a materiality analysis? Because a materiality analysis is often the starting point of conversation on risk, right? What is material to your organization? What is material as far as environmental and social risk, as far as the organization is concerned? So a materiality assessment would mean that these risks and opportunities have been mapped, and both your positive and well as your negative aspects can be considered as relevant factors in your business strategy and decision making. And that's where your starting point of ESG integration comes into the picture as well. Next slide, please. So we are treading into the realm of governance now, corporate governance over here. So we are talking about management and process-based disclosures. So we are talking about whether companies are having processes and procedures with regard to value chain partners. So who is the value chain partner? What does the value chain mean? And anybody who is both upstream and downstream of your organization, which is relevant to the core business operating practices of an organization, is what is a value chain. So do you have principle-based policies which have board approval on it, which are also disclosed to the wider value chain ecosystem within your portal, within your supply portal, or within your employee portal? So do you have these processes and policies which are approved by your board, which actually shows actual commitment to the national guidelines for responsible business? And the disclosure is in a binary, is in a yes or a no. But I think so this is a very important part of disclosure processes as well as transparency and trust is concerned. So do you have specific commitments, goals with regard to targets and performance? Which means that is your company adhering to the right sustainability reporting frameworks that your investor community prefers? So you talk about what are your sustainability targets and your goals, and how is the cascade working down into the organization? So that is superbly important. Number 3 on the list is what is the governance regarding sustainability issues? So do you have a board level committee on sustainability, on CSR? Do you have executive teams which are dedicated to that? Do you have committees which meet regularly to discuss sustainability or climate risk issues? So these also entail that, are you taking your risk management seriously? Have you integrated it within your informed strategic planning? So have you mapped it out, and how are you actually implementing it, right? So what is the nature of the committee that you have formed for sustainability and climate risk? So do you have a responsibility policy? Do you have a sustainability policy in place? What is the frequency of meetings? Where are the minutes? Because often the minutes of the meeting show how much of work is being actually done. So that's also a very important evidence trail for a company to have and disclose. And last but not the least, for section B is, please mention why are you not adhering to any of these principles in the policies? So what is the rationale? What is the reason? Why are you not doing it at the moment? Are you planning to do it at all? And in fact, your process disclosures have to be mapped according to the 9 principles of NGRBC. So why aren't you doing it? If you're about to do it, also disclose that. So it shows intent, and intent is important. Next one. Section C is all about mapping with the 9 principles of NGRBC. So the first principle is businesses should conduct themselves with integrity and in a manner that is ethical, transparent, and accountable. These are very loaded words. Sounds very simple, but very difficult to adhere to, I guess, in a commercial competitive environment. So how do they demonstrate that they are an ethical organization, that there are no misconduct, or there is no loopholes or gaps in their governance? So the reporting data is pretty straightforward. They have a training program and awareness program regarding these trust issues? Do you have an anti-graft policy in place? Do you have a disciplinary action committee? Do you have a complaints log? Do you have a resolution log? Do you have a policies in place? Do you have an SOP in place for everything? Which is very, very important, I guess. It demonstrates commitment, but it also demonstrates intent. So second point of the section C is businesses should provide goods and services in a sustainable and safe manner. Over here, I would like to say that an emphasis on safe is very important over here, because a lot of companies provide FMCG products or B2C consumers, where the safety of the product itself is important, and it's crucial that they demonstrate the safety, especially for pharmaceutical industries and FMCG is very, very important. So what are the kind of indicators in terms of reporting where you can demonstrate your sustainability and safety over here? So do you have a recycling policy in place? Do you have a waste management policy in place? Are you doing your 3R properly? Are you having an extended producer responsibility? The concept of EPR is to do with electronic waste mainly. It came up in the US with the Toxic Reuse Act in the United States by the US EPA. That's where the intellectual origins start off with in EPR, especially in terms of salvage waste and e-waste, in terms of where does your mobile phone, which is discarded, land up in, right? And how we are in the green transition era. We are talking solar all the time, but have we thought about how do we dispose of your solar panels 25 years down the line? Do you have a decommissioning action plan? Do you have a recycling of your solar panels, which have so many critical elements which come from mines in very problematic parts of the world? So are you sourcing your minerals in a responsible way? Are you recycling them in a responsible way? So everything links to everything. So the environmental issues link to human rights issues, for example, which nobody thinks of, but these are all interconnected when you talk about risk, when you talk about enterprise risk over here. So how do you recycle your waste? How do you make sure that most of it is reused? So it's a very important part of what is sustainable and what is safe. So business should respect and promote the well-being of employees, including those in value chain. So it is about respect of employees in your value chain, not only your employee. So it means that your vendors' employees are also included in it. So do you make your vendors adhere to a human rights policy where there is no child work, there is no forced labor, there is no trafficking labor in it? Because so much of our labor who works on our site, whether it's construction or manufacturing, is migrant labor, right? So do you and these are basically day wage labor, these are temporary labor in place. So how are you treating them in place? Do they have a toilet on site? Do they have access to lunch hour off? Are you providing them meals, for example? If they are unwell, do you have a doctor on site? So some of these small things do add up in terms of demonstrating commitment towards your employees. It might not be the entire gamut of decent work ILO standards, which we are talking about, because ILO has an entire list of indicators which demonstrate decent work, and health and safety is a very important pillar of ILO's decent work standards. ILO also has got about 12 or 13 forced labor indicators. So these are all mapped to NGRBC, and NGRBC in turn has been mapped into BRSR. So everything is interrelated. So do you have freedom of association? Do you have a grievance redressal mechanism? Again, the grievance redressal mechanism. So it's not only a general disclosure. So section C and section E are interlinked. So what are your retention rates? So I was talking about what is your turnover rate, right? They're talking about retention rates over here. So everything is interrelated to each other to have a look at your materiality of your organization as far as business continuity is concerned. Next principle, please. So the businesses should be respectful and responsive to stakeholders. It rather sounds vague. when you read at it from a principal perspective. So the objective of the disclosure is to help identify positive and negative impacts of various kinds of stakeholders. So who are your stakeholders? The stakeholders might be the communities where you work in. It might be vulnerable people. It might be displaced people who you work with. So do you engage with them? Do you have a stakeholder engagement plan? Do you do stakeholder mapping with them? Do you have a gender plan? If you have a large section of people who are women, do you have a gender awareness plan among your employees? Do you have a sexual harassment cell? Do you have a whistleblower mechanism? So there's so many important ways how to be responsive to your stakeholders in a meaningful way, right? And not only have your grievance redressal mechanism and your stakeholder policies in English, which nobody can read, but to make them accessible in the local languages as well. So these are some of the ways where disclosure and compliance can also lead to meaningful change on the ground. So businesses should respect and promote human rights. And human rights is an umbrella term, right? So what do you mean by human rights over here? So do you mean by human rights, which is linked to the ILO, which most of it is? So do you have training programs on human rights at your asset level or at your head office level? So do you have remuneration packages? Do you have an affirmative action plan for this differently abled or from the vulnerable communities? So how do you actually engage the least fortunate among you in a respectful and in an inclusive manner? How do you do that? So businesses should respect the environment, for example. And environment is very big, right? For certain industries, environmental impact is meaningful and large, like for mining, for resource extraction, for power, is really huge. It's interface with nature, right? So it has to be a nature positive conversation, not only a people positive conversation, but also a nature positive conversation. So what are the kind of documentation which can meaningfully demonstrate your compliance towards this disclosure protocol? It might be your environmental impact assessment report. It might be your monitoring reports, which you do on a quarterly basis. It might be a carbon footprinting, which you do, right, on an annual basis with regard to TCFD, for example, nowadays, or even CDP, which is easier to do. So how do you actually map it? Do you have ZLD on site, zero liquid discharge on site? Do you have a water footprint on site? Do you do water balance? Do you do an energy balance? Do you do LCA in terms of mapping all the nodes of your production process? So these are some of, and this is the most quantifiable way of managing your environmental footprint, right? Because environment can more or less be quantified. Even your biodiversity footprint can be quantified. You need to bring in some good ecologists to map the baseline and prepare a monitoring plan and a biodiversity action plan in place. If you are a forestry company, for example, or pulp and paper company, for instance. So these are the ways in which you can quantify and actually do work on the ground and show results for it. Yeah. Next one. So among the last three principles regarding the disclosures, businesses, while engaging and influencing public and regulatory policy, should do it in a responsible and transparent manner. So many industries join these umbrella bodies like ASSOCHAM, FICCI, and everything in terms of influencing policy, which is a legitimate part, lobbying informally through regulatory channels such as industry association is mainstream, but it should be done in an ethical way. And how do you disclose the data in terms of participation in events, in terms of attending of meetings? And for example, the technology industry, for example, is under heavy regulatory pressure due to data security, data privacy, data offshoring, data sovereignty, for example. And for example, there are so many different ways of influencing technology, for example. Uh, there are numerous industry associations which try, like NASCOM, for example, for hardware or for software. There's several other industries which try to influence dialogue, right, with the media as well. And perception is king, and perception is reality, right? So they try to manage it. But do you do it in a responsible way? A very key principle behind BRSR, I think so, is a prefix called responsible. Are you doing it the right way? Is often the question which we should ask beyond doing anything. So our business is promoting inclusive growth and equitable development, which is very important in a country like India, where a lot of our countrymen depend upon the environment and depend upon the community and agriculture, for example, on nature for the livelihood. So are you doing environmental and social impact assessments? Social impact assessment, by the way, was a part of the company law in 2013, the amended version. Are you doing a proper rehabilitation resettlement action plan? Are you for infrastructure projects, for example, are you compensating the people whom you are taking land from well? Are you doing it in a fair manner? Are you doing it according to international best practice? So are you trying to manage and remediate the social risk to your project? And are you contributing to a CSR? And are you benefiting the community in a meaningful manner, whether it is directly or indirectly, which is a very important part of equitable development. And equity is something which we do not talk about, and it's referred to as very vague, but it can be made concrete through mechanisms which are real. For example, are you building a school around your facility? Are you having a clean drinking water source? For example, there is a large solar park in Karnataka, among the Karnataka Andhra Pradesh border, which often which is a very water scarce region. So the company which runs the solar park actually has built a water treatment facility over there, so that the community do not have to go 10-15 kilometers to draw drinking water. They can produce and process the water at a very affordable rate within the ambit of the solar park. And solar parks are massive. These run for acres and hectares together, right? So these need to be responsible and tangible practices in a very material way. So last but not the least, how should businesses engage with the customers and provide value to them in a responsible manner? So when we talk about ESG, right, ESG is like a fast-moving target, as I mentioned. It's like an evolving goalpost. So there are issues like data privacy, cybersecurity, which are very, very important, right? There are ransomware attacks, there are hacks happening all the time. Especially for financial companies, data privacy is very important. For technology companies, big data is very important, for example. There are so many scams happening by various nefarious sectors. So how do you actually bolster your product? And cybersecurity sometimes and data privacy sometimes happens to be imperative to your product, right? To the service that you're providing to your value chain. And so how do you do it? Do you engage with digital literacy campaigns, cybersecurity training? How do you actually spread the word around that your grievances, your complaints, for example, hate speech, for example, online harassment, trolling is a form of violence, which we do not look. But these are emerging forms of crime which are happening in the digital world, as most of us have gone online during the pandemic. So, so this is the entire spread and a buffet of indicators. The BRSR has got 112 odd indicators, which seems to be like a very broad marriage buffet in the marriage season at the moment. But these are some of the things which we will try to unpack over the next 4 weeks as we conduct the seminars and information sessions. And we hope to engage with you in a productive manner. Please do speak up, write in, engage with us, because it's a dialogue at the end of the day. It's not a lecture. It's not a classroom over here. And we are here to engage in a holacracy. We are here to engage in a digital chai pe charsha almost. Although we don't have chais at the moment, but you can always bring some of it up at 4:30 in the evening. So many thanks for your attention. And at this point of time, we'll run a small mid session survey, and then after the survey, maybe we can open up the conversation for a dialogue. Please feel free to chime in your questions in the chat box, and please raise your hands as well. And let's have a dialogue for the rest few minutes that we have with us. And thank you so much once again for your attention.
Thank you, sir, for your in-depth insights on ESG and disclosures under BRSR. Attendees can now post their questions in the question answer box, and we will begin with the question answer round. Attendees can also write to us at esg@dodaco.com. We have one question here from Mr. Amrendra Pal Singh. Is materiality need to be also submit as a part of report or provide information only?
At the moment, it's only information whether you have done materiality assessment at the moment. And by the way, materiality is key to understanding of risk, environmental and social risk overall. So it's a part of part A. It's a part A disclosure, but it is contingent to understanding everything else in the BRSR report as well. So materiality is almost like a first step. Well, any other questions? Please raise your hands up. In fact, you can just minimize the screen at the moment so that I can see our friends joining in today.
Mani, it was wonderful session from you, and it's a good initiative for all us EHS professionals. Unfortunately, you'll never be able to see all your friends over here who joined because the cameras are disabled.
Oh, yeah, we need to figure that out. It's a small snag. Apologies for that, sir.
But it was really nice, a good starting. And we hope to learn more on this because it's a fairly new topic for us. So I think for the next 3 more weeks, we'll be much more abreast, or you can say more aware of what the new BRSR guidelines are.
Absolutely, Pravinji. Please do let us know your thoughts if you want a specific topic to be covered, and we can probably integrate that as well. Thank you so much for your participation, and we look forward to having you for the next 3 weeks as well. Meghaji, Dr. Megha.
Yeah, sir, indeed, I agree with Praveen, sir, and it was really a good session. I was present throughout the session, hearing the insights that you are there to tell us on ESG and some of the disclosure norms that are being practiced by some of the organizations. My only question to you is, since I'm also working for some of the organization, as part-time who do climate advisory. I still, have my doubts for the Indian examples of, practicing it. So do you have any examples to quote who are following BRSR norms or TCFD norms that you are telling, so that, wherein we can understand that this is important not only for a large organization, which is UK based, which is US based, but also for a organization, particularly wherein it is in the sector of MSME or in the sector of SME. So something of that sort, if you can just, give me some insights on it.
Thank you, Dr. Mayor, for the excellent question. BRSR, by the way, is for the top 1,000 listed companies at the moment, and the valuation of the 999 companies about 700 crores. So they are not really MSME. But as far as access to markets is concerned, right? Product markets is concerned, most product MSMEs have to comply to carbon disclosure anyway, right? According to TCFD or CDP, because these are supply chain requirements nowadays, ma'am. So many of these SMEs or even small tech companies have to adhere to these. In spite, even if they don't have to do the entire ESG reporting or sustainability reporting, right? They have to do parts of it anyway, right? Like carbon, they have to measure their carbon footprint anyway, ma'am. So as far as MSMEs is concerned, there are many MSMEs who, particularly in machine tools, in terms of manufacturing, who actually feed into global supply chains, who already adhere to a lot of these DEI, which is diversity, equality, inclusion, or carbon footprint measures already, which are a part of Airbus or Honeywell or Shell, for example. They already need to do it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Amitji, I can see your hand raised.
Hi, this is Amit Madhania. I just had a question. We filed the BRSR this time, and largely the questions were around the manufacturing sector is what I saw, because many of them were not relevant for the service sector, especially on the E part. The S and G definitely we do, but on the E part, which is something new, is there any chance of doing something different for the service sector, because a lot of questions are not applicable? Is there any thing happening? Because I read somewhere that from the SEBI that they are revising the BRSR questionnaire also. So is there something happening in that direction? Because a lot of these 1,000 companies in the by the market cap are service sector led, and India is service sector led is the biggest sector right now as a part of GDP. But how many of those questions are relevant, and what do we need to do?
Excellent question, Amitji. The honest answer is that these 112 indicators, right? Not every company will have all the answers to every question, right? So according to our internal research, only about 60 to 70% of all the indicators can be mapped across all the sectors. So if you're a tech company, right, you will have data center emissions. You will have your diversity indicators. You will have grievance redressal mechanisms. You will have these kind of things to report all the time. And I do agree that how does ZLD facility map to a technology company, for example? It does not. But the point of a BRSR is not to fill in every indicator, right? Because it might not be material to you. That's why in the section A, right, there is a question of materiality. So what is your environmental and social risk, and is it imperative to your continuity as well, right? So even if you can't populate everything with regard to the service sector or the technology sector, or you're a consulting firm, if you can't do it, don't fret, because not every indicator is supposed to be filled by you. And by the way, there are specific guidance notes for technology for the service sector as well, provided by the NSE.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amitji. Any other question, friends? Please raise your hands up. Happy to be answering anything.
We have a question from Mr. Amrendra Pal Singh. Also, can you suggest, as SEBI plays some sample reports, is those report as reference we can use to make our BRSR report?
There are plenty of guidance notes available by the NSE and by the SEBI, honestly speaking. There are quite a few available already, available in the public domain. And of course, there are guidance notes by think tanks as well. So there is plenty of great literature available for you to refer. We will be happy to share some with you in case if you write into us at esg@lolaco.com.
There is one question from an anonymous attendee. As the leadership indicators are not mandatory, can it not be disclosed?
Well, for this year onward, if you do not comply with the leadership indicators, you can leave them out. But a best practice suggestion would be always to attempt them because in the due course they will become mandatory as the world moves towards more stringent climate and environmental standards.
Another question is from Mr. Naman Kumar. Can you explain more about reporting boundary?
Reporting boundary is an accounting concept, which means that if you are a company which is already listed on the NSE, right, and if you do financial disclosures on a quarterly basis, which you have to do anyway for SEBI or NSE, then you use the same reporting boundary for your environmental, social, and governance indicators for BRSR, because you are reporting to the same regulator at the end of the day.
Another question is from Mr. Shubham P. Where do government entities fit in the process of ESG disclosures of their own processes?
Unfortunately, Shubham, thank you so much for the question. Unfortunately, Shubham, this is for private sector entities who are listed on the National Stock Exchange. So as far as, for example, there is an entire ecosystem of reporting for venture capital funds or for the private equity ecosystem, right? There is also a different ecosystem for public sector entities who take international financing from the IIB or the World Bank or ADB, and they have to comply with their own set of IFC performance standards and equator principles over there. So that's a completely different disclosure ecosystem, and we can have another webinar on that.
Another question is from Mr. Shubham P. For MSME, how does ESG reporting work and where does ERP fit in? Also, in case of freelancing individuals.
Well, as far as ESG is concerned, as I mentioned, if you're an MSME or even a freelancer or a gig economy player, right, platform economy player, you do ESG because it's a part of your supply requirements to a larger organization. It's a part of your supply chain commitments. So carbon and human rights often is a supply chain commitment. For example, if you want to supply to IKEA, for example, you have to adhere to very stringent human rights policies because it's a Swedish company with very stringent human rights interpretations over there. It's the same thing with Walmart, the same thing with Shell. Any global organization will have its own set of indicators. So if you're an MSME, your reporting drive is not the regulator, but your regulator is the B2B customer whom you're supplying to and their responsibility matrices.
Another question is from Mr. Shubham P. Does ESG reporting become a deterrent for setting up businesses or FDIs?
No, not at all, because it's a very global trend, right? And ESG reporting is very global. Well, on the contrary, FDI, you will attract more FDI if you're climate compliant nowadays, instead of vice versa, because you are in sync with the global zeitgeist. You are in sync with the global impulse, which talks about a planet positive, a people positive, and a nature positive environment in terms of business.
Next question is from Mr. Amandip Singh. Will SEBI evaluate if the company's reporting in BRSR is up to mark or not?
Yes, there will be assessments. That's why the compliance is being held. But at some stage of the evolution, even assurance will come in. Because there are already norms by the EU which are trying to stop greenwashing. So once it comes in the EU or in the US, chances are that Asia will follow the tailwind sooner or later.
Next question is from Mr. Sanjog Wadhwani. What's the cutoff date for deciding the top 1,000 companies by market capitalization as market cap changes daily?
It is March 31st of last year. And there is a list of the top 1,000 entities already out.
The question is from Mr. Amandeep Singh. Does the company require to externally audit all its BRSR data?
One more time, I did not capture it in its full essence. One more time, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. The question is from Mr. Amandeep Singh. Does the company require to externally audit all its BRSR data?
Well, that is a part of assurance, honestly speaking, and assurance is not mandatory as of now. But some of the players can opt for assurance if they want their data to be considered even more valuable in terms of transparency and trust.
There are no more questions.
Thank you so much, everybody, for your valuable questions and for your time. I'm here for a couple of minutes more. If there is any last moment clarification question which we can answer over here as the Lothan Co ESG team, or you can write into us or join us for the next 4 weeks on a Friday. Mr. Amit, I can see your hand.
Yeah, hi. Since there was time, I thought I'll ask you one more question, because when we did the BRSR reporting last time, we are from a travel company. I'm from Thomas Cook, a travel company.
Yeah.
And what we saw is in the scope 1, there is hardly anything because we don't generate electricity for the consumption. And in scope 2 is largely the electricity that we consume from the grid. So I found that these are the only 2 things that we have to work on in capturing that data, monitoring and publishing. Do you see, apart from small, again, electricity consumption through data center and all, and in the scope 3 is the business travel. So how important is scope 3, and is my understanding on scope 1 and 2 is correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Your scope 1 essentially means that if you do any manufacturing, right? And of course, as a service entity, you don't manufacture anything. As far as your scope 2 is concerned, you're taking electricity from the grid, right? Or you're taking electricity from a renewable feed-in tariff provider, which can easily be quantified. And if you use data center as well, which can be quantified quite easily as a service-led entity, right? As far as scope 3 is concerned, business travel is concerned, scope 3 is still considered a leadership indicator. And scope 3 can be complicated to calculate, depends upon your reporting boundaries, but that's something we can have a conversation on a different chat panel. Yeah. Mohana Mukherjee has her hand up.
Yeah, sir, it's a very good lecture and it's a very beneficial lecture for us. So I have one question that if I want to attend all the episodes, do I need to register again, or the same registration will we can continue with the same registration?
Simone, you are the best person to answer this.
Yes, you can continue with the same registration. So when we send the first registration form, in the registration form, there were the details of the episodes were mentioned. So have you selected?
Actually, I have selected. No, actually, I have selected for these episodes only for today. Okay.
No problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I want to continue all the episodes.
No problem. I will forward. You can write to me on esg@lodaco.com, and I will forward you the registration details for the next episodes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. I can see Krish Krishnamurthy and Dibjit Sarkar. I will go first with Dibjit Sarkar. Thank you, sir. If you can unmute and ask a question.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I want to convey my most thank you for starting a new session on BRSR. This is very much helpful for us also. Sir, I have one question actually. Okay, how environmental data can be, what we interpret in our organization actually. So how environmental data shall be evaluated by SEBI when we put the data in report, then how it will be interpreted in by the SEBI personnel? Can you guide me?
Well, I'm personally not a regulator, but I can certainly tell you as an environmental engineer that most of the data which is provided in the report, right, which is asked for in your report. If you're doing quarterly monitoring, do you do quarterly environmental monitoring?
We carry out monthly monitoring as well by third party affiliated by the Gujarat Pollution Control Board as well as MAFCC approved agency. Okay, and as well as we carry out in-house monitoring because we have a complete in-house monitoring team also for air monitoring, air emission monitoring, and water pollution control monitoring. Okay, sir. So
Yes,
we
yeah.
provide that data.
If you have a continuous air emission monitoring system and a continuous water monitoring system, and if you do monthly and quarterly monitoring, right, you have all the data with you. You only have to analyze your data and fill up the principle 6 of the section C of BRSR.
Okay. Thank you, sir. We will do accordingly, and I will continue your next episodes also. Then only I will be totally clear. Then how we will represent or how we will participate in BRSR reporting system.
Thank you so much, sir, for your question, and we look forward to your participation in the forthcoming sessions as well. Mr. Krish Krishnamurthy, if you can unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you so much for enlightening us on BRSR reporting. What I would like to see, I have just gotten a certificate in BRSR from the MCA last year during the lockdown. So for me, this is more of it's more of an academic interest than anything else. So for me, it's like a continuing education kind of program. Now, I would like to see the linkage between SDG, CSR, NGRBC or BRSR in some of your subsequent episodes, if you could do that. And I think that would be very helpful for smaller organization, how to, if they are not in the 1,000 companies listed on the stock exchange, how they still will participate in this whole process of ESG and CSR, etc. I would probably, that would be helpful, to show people the linkage between SDGs, CSR, and NGRBC.
Absolutely, sir. As I mentioned in the presentation as well, everything in BRSR, right, is mapped to the SDG, and NGRBC is linked to the SDG as well.
Yeah.
So everything is a holacracy almost, right? It's circular loops around each other. It's overlapping diagrams. You can think of it as an onion. So everything is interlinked, and we have already done the research internally. We will be happy to show you some of our mapping in the subsequent episodes. Maybe in the next episode itself, if you join in, we can discuss.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Well, any more questions?
There is one question from an anonymous attendee. Shouldn't BRSR create a lot of new jobs in the ESG field?
Well, there are plenty of green jobs being generated all the time, right? Due to carbon and disclosures, and but green jobs is a part of the entire energy transition, right? So these are all jobs which will be created as fossil fuels. As we transition from an internal combustion era to an EV era, there will be new jobs which will be created, and of course, BRSR is a part of the international movement towards sustainability reporting, right? So there will be entirely new class of professionals called sustainability disclosure professionals, and it's an exciting space. I can still see some hands up if you, but in case if there are no more questions, we would like to close it here, and we would welcome you to join into subsequent episodes on BRSR, where we'll do a deep dive on each topic, right? What are the plans required? What are the procedures? How do we report? What are the challenges provided in the entire BRSR journey? And we'll be happy to have all of you again next week with us.
There are no more questions.
We can close it here, and if you have some final remarks, Simone, you can add.
So with this, we conclude our first episode. Thank you everyone for giving your precious time to us, and we look forward to your participation in the subsequent episodes.
Thank you so much. Have a nice weekend, all of you. Bye-bye.